Welcome aboard the Millennial Falcon. We are parked in the hangar bay today for routine maintenance. Join us for a game of Dejarik, Zabak, or in tonight's case, perhaps a tabletop RPG, or just a hangout. Make sure to subscribe to the show, and if you want to get an audio-only version of this episode, you can become a Patreon. Actually, for this episode, it'll just be an early version. We will release the audio version on the regular feed Wednesday this week. So everyone will get access to it. But if you want to get it early, you can also just listen on YouTube as we are recording tonight. So today we have a special guest. We have the Dungeon Master himself, Derrick, from the Dungeon Master's block, a Dungeons and Dragons / tabletop RPG podcast all about honing your skills as a Dungeon Master. Derrick, how's it going?
It is so good. Thank you for inviting me on here. I'm glad we got to connect a few months ago, and I'm super excited to be here to chat about all things tabletop gaming and Star Wars.
Perfect. Yeah, and obviously I have with me Christian. How's it going?
All right, how you doing?
Good.
Your ever loyal co-pilot. Am I the pilot or are you the pilot? I don't know if we've ever straightened that out.
I'm the Chewbacca who fires the gun.
Okay, you're the Chewbacca to my Han Solo.
Yeah. And then we also have returning guest of the show, returning friend of the show, Gerald. How's it going, my man?
Hello. I was advised by my legal counsel at Grimlore to neither confirm nor deny my stowaway tendencies.
We actually didn't invite him; he just appeared.
Before Gerald, why don't you plug all your stuff? You got your own podcast and stuff too. Plug that, and then we'll get going into the convo.
Sure thing. Yep, I host on the Grimlore podcast, where my co-host and I talk about all things Warhammer Fantasy, Age of Sigmar, if you're into those settings, and then every so often we also talk about some Destiny and Halo, and really any other settings we feel like talking about. So come give us a look whenever you're done listening to this.
Sweet. All right, Derrick. Before we get into much of the discussion, give us the lowdown on the pod. What's it all about? What exactly are you guys trying to do there?
Yeah, so our tagline is we want everyone to keep on dungeon mastering. So that means like if you are already doing it, you should keep doing it. But if you haven't tried it yet, you should definitely give it a try. I'm a co-host on the Dungeon Master's block. It has been running for coming up on 11 years now.
Wow.
I have not been a part of the show for that long. My co-host Neil has, but he couldn't make it tonight. He's actually on a cruise ship running D&D games for like people on a cruise ship, which is pretty cool. So
is that a full-time job you can get into?
It's not a full-time job. It's a once a year kind of thing, but he does get paid for it. So that's a pretty sweet gig. I decided to give him a pass. I guess if you're on the high seas, you don't have to be here with us. But yeah, I've been helping Neil with the show for a little while now. And previous to that, I had my own interview show, not unlike this, called How Not to DM or How Not to Dungeon Master, where I would bring people on who were either DMs, as part of like podcasts or YouTube channels or Twitch streams, or who were designing tabletop games and that kind of thing. And I would just talk to them about the theory behind running games and then also, their cool projects and stuff. But yeah, the Dungeon Master's block is specifically about like the nuts and bolts of what it takes to run a game, and also trying to give you ideas or tips or tricks or that kind of thing on running games and making it as easy as possible and as accessible as possible. So
that's great. Do you want to just give us, even for the some of the listeners here, because a lot of our listeners might be pretty new to tabletop RPGs. Do you want to just give us like a rundown? What is a dungeon master? What's his role? What does that person do?
Sure. So I'm going to assume that like 98% of people who are listening have played some kind of RPG video game, whether it be like as simple as Pokemon I mean, I guess Pokemon isn't necessarily simple, but it could be simple. To games like Skyrim or even KOTOR, right? KOTOR is a perfect example of an RPG. Basically, the Dungeon Master is like the computer in those scenarios, the person who runs the world, controls all of the non-playable characters that you interact with, describes the environment, and then ultimately adjudicates the rules of the game you're playing if there's not already kind of like a hard and fast rule as part of the books that you're playing with or the system you're playing. So they're the ones who are telling the story and asking you, prompting you with what you would like to do next, and then kind of telling you the results of your actions in real time. So, for example, Han decides to fly the Falcon into a crater, on a random asteroid, right? And the DM might have set this trap already, like, okay, that's going to be like the mouth of a giant worm, right? You would kind of like tell them what happens as a result of their decision to go there, like, oh wow, the ground is really squishy here and there's stuff flying around, and oh, now it's starting to shake. You've got to roll some dice to see how well you can get back into your ship and pilot it out before you get eaten by this thing. I don't know, that's just like an example I can think of that that a DM would be doing. So yeah, it's a very strange role that's kind of unlike any board game or anything else that you would have played, because you ultimately have a lot of control. But the goal is to try to facilitate as much fun and interaction and meaningful moments as possible with the people who are playing the game with you.
Now, when you're like playing the game, and I have dabbled in RPGs, I can't say I've played a whole lot. Christian, you probably played a lot more than I have.
Probably about the same, to be honest with you.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought you would have
I've never really been in the big pen and paper world, but I have done a little bit of, maybe one campaign of Dungeons and Dragons, a couple of 40K ones. But
how are the rules set up? Like, is it just completely arbitrary, or do you have a set out previous set of rules for your, like, you primarily play Dungeons and Dragons? We'll get into the Star Wars stuff soon, but you primarily play Dungeons and Dragons. There's like rule books and all that kind of stuff? Like,
exactly.
How much power does the Dungeon Master have?
So there's 3 core rule books as part of D&D, and each there's been, I guess, technically like 5 official editions with some caveats since the game was first published over 50 years ago. So each new edition of the game comes with 3 books. You've got your player's handbook, which teaches you how to build your character with your like stats and your weapons and your armor, that kind of stuff, like your abilities that you can do, your spells that you can cast. There's the Dungeon Master's handbook, which is like, or the Dungeon Master's guide, which is how to run the games, like what you need to do to consider like writing this big epic story, how to, make it interesting for your players, a bunch of rules on how to do that. And then you've got the monster manual, which is just a book full of stat blocks of monsters that you can throw at your players in various situations. So those are the 3 core rule books. The player's handbook basically has everything you need to know to play the game. And then the other 2 are I guess you could say, more supplemental, because they're not like the actual rules on running the game, but more like, here's how to, if you're trying to run a game and you've never done it before, here's some ideas. And then the monster manual is like, if you're not going to make up every single monster, here's a bunch that you can pull from. But yeah, the rules are all laid out. But the rule books will tell you if you want to change a rule, do it. Like it's not hard and fast. Like there are times where you might play at a convention, and if you're playing at a convention, like you all have to decide on specifically how stuff is going to work for that game. There are some conventions that'll do like tournaments where you see who can finish the dungeon the fastest, kind of thing. And in those situations, you obviously try to make it as even as possible. But your own home game can be just about whatever you want. And when I first started playing D&D, I remember I was doing it with some coworkers, and we were getting on an elevator in my office building, and I was like, you could do anything with this if you wanted to. Like, you could strip it down to nuts and bolts, and you could do Star Trek, you could do Star Wars, you could do, I was just like thinking about all this stuff. And then, a few Googles later, I find out, yeah, there are games that are already designed for all of these things if you want. But yeah, I feel like that's kind of the beauty of tabletop role-playing games is D&D, like I said, started 50 years ago. And basically every RPG since then has some of the D&D DNA in it, whether it's like the way stats work or like, leveling up or there's just like so much influence that permeates all of that kind of gaming that comes from D&D, which I find really fascinating.
Yeah, Gerald, you were telling me before the show about KOTOR and D&D. You want to just tell me what you were saying there?
Yeah.
Oh, yep. So I'm very new to the tabletop side of RPGs, but I've played like video game RPGs for years, and among them, Knights of the Old Republic's 1 and 2. And I was under the impression it was like it uses the Pathfinder engine, but I was actually corrected by a couple of friends. So shout out to you guys that it actually uses modified rules for Dungeons and Dragons 3rd edition, I believe.
Yeah, and Pathfinder comes from 3rd edition as well, so you'd be forgiven for assuming that it's Pathfinder rules. Yeah, so
even like the rules that have been kind of established on the tabletop have gone into video games.
Baldur's Gate is a great example, right? That's specifically D&D. But you've got like Fallout. Like I said, Fallout uses a lot of kind of D&D ideas.
Yeah.
Bethesda does a lot of RPGs kind of based on that, like Skyrim. Again, not like exact copy of what D&D is, but Skyrim, there's a bunch of spells that are exact copies of D&D spells and that kind of thing. So, yeah.
I imagine like most dungeon crawler games are kind of a D&D ripoff, if you will. I don't know, maybe that's the wrong word to use, but
inspired by, right? Like anybody who's built a dungeon crawler probably has played D&D before and said, ooh, I want to put my own unique spin on it, right?
Yeah. Like I think I don't know if you played those really old like Nintendo Japanese games like Dragon Quest, Dragon Warrior, I think it was originally called, where it's just like the 2D sort of tabletop dungeon crawler. And to me, I'm like, oh, this must be just they put Dungeons and Dragons in video game form, and that was kind of the whole idea.
Yeah, I haven't played those specifically, but I'm sure there's similarities. Yeah. But yeah, I love D&D for a lot of reasons, but I feel like being able to kind of notice the patterns is a lot of fun. And then, I like it because it's a fun creative outlet. Podcasting is fun as well, but just being able to tell a unique story with my friends, and we get to share these adventures together. And there's just something to be said for that kind of camaraderie and that kind of fun that you can't really get from anything else that I have found yet. If I find something, I'll let you know. But yeah, it's so unique and fun. And
like how long have you been into this hobby?
Yeah, I started running games in 2018, I believe. I was playing a little bit before that. So in the grand scheme of a 50-year game, relatively new, but long enough that I've seen some things, So yeah.
I got a question for you. Obviously being a DM is one thing and being a player is another. How easy is it to make that switch?
It's a great question.
Can you be a good player but a terrible DM and vice versa, or?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the funny thing is, like, I've met a lot of people who I think would be very good at it, but they are just afraid of kind of taking that leap, if that makes sense. It seems like it would be a lot harder than it is. It is. I don't want to discount it. It is difficult. It takes a lot of improv skills. you need to know enough of the rules to get by. You don't have to know all the rules because, you know, you can Google them, you can look them up in your book, you can tell your friend who's at the table to look up the rule while you're playing. Like, it's not, I don't know. I've never played with a group who's like mad at me for not knowing a rule, right? No one cares. We're all just there to have fun. And so if someone doesn't know something, we can look it up, or we can just make a decision on the fly and then look it up later. But yeah, to make the transition, I wanted to do it just because I've always liked fantasy, and I've liked sci-fi, and I've liked storytelling. And so when I started playing, I was like, oh, I could think of so many fun things to do. Like at least 1 or 2 games in, 1 or 2 sessions in, I was already writing in my own Google Doc. All right, after we're done with that thing that we're playing, I'm going to run this for everybody. And it's going to be super fun. So yeah, I made the jump really quickly because I like the creative aspect of it. I like the storytelling. I like the improv aspect. So if you're not, I don't know, even if you're not good at those things, I feel like you can still be a good DM if you are trying to, like I was saying earlier, facilitate the most fun possible. You don't have to be an expert in any of these necessarily, but I feel like the best DMs started as players. There are people out there who like want to get into D&D but don't know anybody else who's doing it, and so they kind of have to, like, they're like, all right, well, I'm going to play, I'm going to have to start a game, and I'm going to have to run it and convince my friends to play with me. But I feel like the best player or the best DMs probably watch it a little bit, see how it's done, and then take from the stuff that they've seen and kind of create their own way of doing things. That's really why I started my first show, How Not to DM, was I wanted to interview all of these DMs that I knew and respected and get their takes on things and see how they did things and why. And if I liked what I heard, I'd take it on and I'd say, all right, I'm going to try to do that too. But if I didn't like it, then, you don't have to. So, I don't think it's a hard transition, but I think a lot of people are held back just because they don't want to screw up. They don't want to look dumb. They don't feel like they will be good enough, like thinking quickly on their feet to do it. So, yeah.
I always, the couple times I did do RPGs, I found that like probably the most difficult. I don't know if I'm as good at improv, but I like sort of the storytelling aspect and the world building that you can do. And like one thing, what do you think like the utility of using a game like this just to write stories? Like if you were even, say you were a novelist or something, could you conceivably be like, okay, I'm going to do this D&D campaign or Star Wars RPG, and I'm gonna try and get inspiration to write my story? Could you do that, or is it too all over the place or too unpredictable to make like a good linear story?
I think both. I've talked to people who have done that, who've turned
their
campaigns into either novels or graphic novels or short stories, that kind of thing. So it definitely has happened, and people have done it before on all sorts of games, not just D&D, right? D&D is like a specific kind of high fantasy role-playing game, but there's dozens of other games out there with very different flavors. But yeah, I've talked to people who've done it, and I think it's definitely possible. There is an aspect of chaos because your players could choose to do anything. Some of the limitations of your computer games, right, is just like the developers didn't write that into the game, right? It's like, well, that's not something you can do. Like you've got NPCs that can't die for story reasons, or you've got doors you can't go through, or that kind of thing. And D&D is more freeform than that, because you probably could attack someone and kill someone, and then it would throw a big wrench in the plans or the story that the DM is writing, but it would make for a new interesting path, right? Like that kind of thing happens all the time, where your players do something that you don't expect, and you just have to kind of roll with it and figure out how to make it work and make the story make sense because of that. So But yeah, I think, like I said, I've talked to people who've done it. I don't think every campaign should be a book or a movie, but some of them definitely can.
Yeah, like go
on
ahead.
that note, Jordan, I don't know if you've heard of Critical Role. They're a pretty popular D&D group, and
Yeah.
they made their campaign. Well, first they recorded themselves playing, and that created a huge audience. And they actually turned it into an animated series, The Legend of Vox Machina, that's produced through Amazon. So you can definitely
go check that out.
Yeah. I wish they were paying me for that ad, but
that would be nice.
Yeah,
that's a great example. The cast is all voice actors who are like prominent voice actors on video games. They have voice actors who did like The Last of Us and a bunch of anime voice actors, that kind of thing. So they are very good at the role play and the improv aspect of it. And I feel like that's probably part of the reason why they have such a big audience is because they're good at that stuff. And the DM also, I think he's been doing it for like decades, and he's also a voice actor. So they definitely, their campaign is story worthy because of all of the work they put into it. But it helps that when it becomes your job, like you get to spend all day thinking about how to make a good story and probably hire on some people to help you write it and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Now, like, could you conceivably do, if you had a story already, or the bones of a story that you wanted to do, and then you use that as the premise for your game, maybe to help, literally as a tool to help you write it. Is that something you would recommend, or no?
It can help. Obviously you want to try to follow a story structure where you've got rising action, you've got conflict, that builds to some kind of resolution. I try to break that story structure into smaller pieces. D&D specifically, you have characters from level 1 to 20. And so most campaigns are between 1 and 20 somewhere, right? Like some will go 1 to 12, some will go like 5 to 15 or whatever. It really just depends on how things are going. But because of the characters' choices, you don't want to like put too much rigidity into the structure of the game, because you really want to let them react honestly to what you are telling them is happening. And then you react honestly to their choices as part of whatever you've given them to decide. A lot of people will make this joke like, if you're not going to let their players decide what's going to happen, then you should just go write this as a novel, right? Like, go write your novel. We don't want to play your novel. We want to play a game where our choices matter and we are going to affect the outcome of the game. So I do like to try to plan out like a few sessions in advance. Like, okay, I think they're going to do X, which means that Y will happen. And then, we're going to head on to Z. That doesn't always work. But if you're good at like giving them interesting, engaging story hooks, and your players are good at taking those story hooks instead of saying, I'm going to go chase this squirrel, then usually you can kind of lead them on a pathway to eventually get to where you want to go. Especially if you've like got some large threat, a big villain or something like that, that's easy to want to oppose, then you can kind of herd them in a specific direction. But you don't want to like not give them choice. Mm-hmm. You want to let them try to solve the problems how they think it's best to solve them.
Yeah, fair. And I guess that kind of segues into my next question. Like, what are the major do's and don'ts about RPGs that if you're playing, like both for the DM and the players, like what are some big pitfalls that can really ruin your night?
Yeah. I think the first thing I would say is, if you're going to play a game with people, I would decide before you ever roll your first die what the game is going to be like, what the themes are going to be, what the feel is going to be, and make sure that you're all aligned in that. For instance, you don't want to have a group where one guy wants to do like, hardcore survival horror, and then someone else wants to, have a farm and raise llamas. Like it's not going to go well together. One of them is going to want to be in conflict constantly and want to be like scared and want to be challenged, and the other one just wants to do something fun and low stakes, right? So making sure everyone agrees on what kind of game you're going to be playing is important to start. And then from there, just kind of constant contact with everybody. I've got a group chat going, but then I'll also text my friends individually and be like, hey, like, how are you feeling about this stuff? Are you interested in exploring this as part of your character's backstory? And I feel like the constant communication means that I know where everybody's at and I know what they're interested in doing next. And then I can easily keep them engaged and keep everybody happy and excited. So yeah, I feel like that's the number one thing I would say when you're starting out. The pitfall is like starting a game and not all being on the same page. And then the other one, pretty similar to what you were saying, don't railroad everybody into your specific vision of what this story is supposed to be. It's called a collaborative storytelling game for a reason. You're supposed to all be collaborating together. That doesn't mean like you all have to agree all the time. That doesn't mean your characters have to agree, right? Having conflict within your group is interesting, and that can that can be an interesting story. So, but just make sure that everyone is on board for that kind of stuff. There's a Reddit thread called RPG horror stories. So if you're ever interested in like seeing what happens in these games where people aren't on the same page or are just crazy, you can go read through some of those for a laugh.
Do you have an RPG horror story?
The people I've played with, I've been familiar enough with. I haven't had anything like really truly sad or terrible happen. I have a friend's story that I'm going to tell though. He's never going to see this, so it's probably fine. He brought up they were playing a game, and I think a child died in the game. Someone's child or like a child died in the game, and he didn't know this, but his friend's wife who was playing had like just had a miscarriage a few months ago. And so that just ruined that game. And he felt super bad about it. It's stuff like that. Like you kind of got to like know your audience, and that's private stuff though, right? Like she's not going to come out and say that. And that's not going to be communicated at the start. But yeah, you just have to be careful with the kind of stuff you're going to introduce and make sure everyone's on board for it. Like I said, there's going to be groups where they're like, terrorize us, like as terrible as you want to make it, we're ready for it, and that's fine. But yeah, just don't don't do that to your group when they're not ready for the heat. Yeah,
or if you don't know them.
Yeah, if you don't know them super well. Yeah.
So I did DM a 40k RPG, and definitely for me it always turns into like I like to psychologically torture the players and just put
and that's kind of 40k, right? Like if people are playing a game of 40k, I'm assuming they know what they're in for.
The setting, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like who should be a DM? Should everyone practice being a DM, or are there just people who are like should like naturally gravitate towards being a player versus being a DM?
I think everyone should try it at least once. Okay. That's my opinion. I definitely think there are people out there who are not good at it. Again, the RPG horror stories Reddit, you're going to see people out there who are like really weird and have made very strange choices. There was a guy who was running a game online during COVID times, and I joined up just because I was like, all right, I'm pretty bored. I'm going to try this. It was a stranger, and his game consisted of us just like wandering around this island. The first thing he did was like arrest me in the street. I had done nothing wrong. He took all my stuff, took everybody's stuff, sent us on a slave ship across the ocean. The ship capsized, and we just like woke up on the beach with nothing. And then it was just like there was no story, there was no cohesiveness. It was just kind of like, all right, so you wanted this to happen, but like what choices did we make that got us to this point? If you had told us, hey, we're gonna start on a beach because you just got shipwrecked, I'd be like, okay, so I know what I'm in for. But like, if you like let me build this character and make all these decisions about this armor I'm gonna get and this sword I'm gonna get, and like, ooh, I'm gonna have all this stuff, and then you just wash me up on the beach, like, what did I do that for? You know?
It's
So yeah,
it's almost like I don't know like how familiar you are with theology, but there's like a Calvinist versus Arminian debate where it's like one believes God directs everything and the other believes like God gives everyone free will. And it's almost like if you have a DM that's very Calvinist in their persuasion, they're gonna get an outcome no matter what, and they're gonna make it happen no matter what the choices of the players that they make, right? So
right. That's funny. That's a great analogy. Exactly that. Yeah, the DMs who want to control everything and don't want to give you a chance to try to do something fun,
yeah.
they probably shouldn't do it. So yeah, not everyone should be a DM, but I feel like everyone should try it just so that you know what it's like. Especially if you're like into playing role-playing games, you should give it a shot because it can be a ton of fun. And even if you don't want to do it all the time, like I know tons of people who are in groups where everyone just like rotates and takes a turn, and we'll do like a short little mini game, a few months worth, and then they'll move on to something else. And actually the Star Wars game that I've started running now is that it's just like I'm trying to shoot for like 10 or so sessions of us actually meeting in person and playing, because I'm going for more of the cinematic, like, okay, this is just like a movie's worth of plot, that kind of feel. So yeah, DMing, it doesn't have to be like 5 years long. Commit your life to it. You can definitely take turns. You can even do what's called a one shot, where you just show up, you play for like 2-3 hours, you go through a short little story, and that's it. Then that can be fun too. So
How like what do you call it? Like a campaign? Do you call it okay? How long do your campaigns typically last?
So the couple that I've run that have finished without sputtering out because of scheduling conflicts or whatever, we're both like 2 to 3 years long.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
that's commitment.
Yeah.
There's a group that I'm part of that this one DM, granted, he's very talented in what he does because he runs a Dark Heresy campaign. We're in the middle of a Warhammer Fantasy RPG campaign, but then the group that we're with actually trade out on different days of the week because each of them has their own campaigns that they run. I forgot where I was going with this, but it's very kind of like how you mentioned it. And the Grimlore Discord actually has kind of drawn a lot of the D&D crowd. So I got one patron that is running a D&D campaign for our Patreon only material, and then another one that wants to run like a Halloween one shot later this year. So it's very, very interesting what all people come up with.
Yeah, and like I said, you can kind of make it to be anything, and there's tabletop games out there for just about any kind of story you want to tell. I've got a few systems here behind me. Like there's one that's for like the Alien movies. You can run a game that's like Alien. There's Call of Cthulhu if you like cosmic horror. There's a system called Kids on Bikes, which is really stripped down and simple, not a lot of like mechanics or anything, but it's like your Spielberg movies or your Stranger Things kind of feel, where you like playing kids who are solving these weird mysteries in town. There's a ton of sci-fi stuff out there. I've got The Expanse back here. I've got Star Wars. I've got one called Scum and Villainy, which is not about Star Wars,
Really?
but it used that tagline, so I was like, I'll check it out. You're basically like a smuggler in a galaxy trying to scrape by. So yeah, there's tons of different kinds.
They didn't want
to
pay that Star Wars licensing fee.
I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, who would, right?
Yeah.
We did an interview with Alessio Cavatore, who used to work for Games Workshop, and he wrote a My Little Pony role-playing game. You can go look up and you can buy it. Like it's actually quite well thought out, like mechanically and rules-wise. But of course, like if that's your subject matter that you want to get into, it's out there.
Like honestly, there's a site called itch.io, and it's got a bunch of indie like computer games on it too. But itch.io has tons of indie tabletop games where people have just done like a one-off like that. I wrote one a few years ago called called Dig, which is just like Holes, the book and the movie, where you're like kids at a disciplinary camp and you got to figure out how to escape. Anyway, there's so many games out there to play.
Mm-hmm.
There's a niche for you if you have your...
For sure, there's a niche. Yeah.
All right, website that our group uses, Roll20, has like you can create your own game, and it has like thousands of systems that you can do to create your own game. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, on that note, Ben, let's segue. You said you were doing a Star Wars campaign. Tell us what that's about. Kind of give us the bare bones of it. What is this? What system are you using? That kind of thing.
Yeah, so a little bit of backstory. I found your show because we were approached by the same network that you're part of, Believe. And I was like, oh, fellow nerds. Like, I'm sure, whatever happens, I would probably get along with these folks. So I took a mental note. And then, my group and I were talking, my gaming group and I were talking about what we were going to play next. And I'm always trying to get them to try new stuff instead of rolling back on the same old Dungeons and Dragons. I like it. And, I like playing it, but I like trying new stuff too. And so I knew I had some Star Wars nerds in the group. And I was like, what if we play this game called Star Wars 5e? The current edition Dungeons and Dragons on is called 5e 5th edition. And so someone has gone in and like hacked the whole game and made a Star Wars version of it. You can check this out at www.sw5e.com. They've got a character builder. They've got a bunch of books. Like they've got a starship book. They've got a player's book. They've got a book about like building cantinas and locations and whatnot. But it's all for free and it's all there. And that's the system we're using right now to run this game. The reason I came back and started listening to your show was I wanted to run a Star Wars game in a time that none of my players would have been familiar with, whether it's from the movies or from KOTOR or that kind of stuff. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to have to dig deep, right? I'm going to have to find some lore that's like old school or weird and not really talked about in any of the super popular media. I did a little Google form and I just asked everybody what they were interested in. And everyone said they were interested in like Old Republic, amongst other things, right? I gave them a bunch of options, but everyone said Old Republic. So I was like, all right, we're going to go deep and see what we got. And I said, well, how am I going to learn all this lore while I'm working? I'm going to have to listen to a podcast. And then I hit up Star Wars to see what you had. So we are playing at the tail end of the 100 Years of Darkness. That's where we're starting, the Second Great Schism. And so I'm going to have my players, playing.
That's a great period, I think.
Yeah.
If I was going to do a RPG, that would be like a good place to pick, but go on.
Yeah. So the reason I chose it was there's not a ton of lore, right? So like I can be forgiven for like making up some stuff and not offending people who like know the lore, right? Like I've got a guy in my group who's big into Star Wars and I can't get much past him, right? But if I choose an era that he's not familiar with, I can make up some names or I can throw in some names and he's not going to recognize them and immediately know, oh, that's Carnus Mur, that's a Junta Paul, whatever. Like it's just going to sound like gibberish to him. So that was the goal.
I feel like it's a little you're walking on eggshells if you're doing any kind of RPG in the original trilogy or even the sequel trilogy. You're gonna you might be, because people are get pretty cackly about their lore there. Like
they can, yeah. And I mean, if we were to play in a very well-known era, I would choose a planet that hadn't been covered yet and perhaps like a story that happens in the background that's maybe from comic books or something, so that it's not like breaking, actual Star Wars canon from the original trilogy or whatever.
You kill Anakin Skywalker as a child.
Right. Like, yeah, you could totally do something like that if you wanted to, but I'm more interested in preserving it as much as possible and like playing in the sandbox instead of wrecking it. So
I feel like an easy solution to that issue would be like the galaxy is a giant place, so you could pick any number of unexplored regions or backwater areas that really don't have anything to it. So
yeah, but the fun of Star Wars is being part of the war, right? Like feeling like, I don't know. I mean, I felt like if you're playing a role-playing game, the part that people would be interested in is feeling like you are affecting these galaxy-wide events, right? These galaxy-wide politics and battles and stuff. So yeah, I chose the 100 Years of Darkness and the tail end of it specifically because I want the end of this game to be the Battle of Corvus, and possibly my players helping exile the 12 Dark Jedi to Korriban so that they can, set that ball in motion of the creation of the Sith Empire. So yeah, that's where we're at. I guess I got to tell them not to listen to this.
I was about to say, I hope you didn't spoil that.
I don't think they don't listen to my other show, so I would be surprised if they came to listen to this. But yeah. So that's the era I picked just because it seemed really fun. Very Star Wars still, right? Like there's good, there's evil, there's this pulpy action, and there's weird stuff that happens too. I'm using Carnus Mur's like Rakghoul Plague as a big part of it too, so kind of adding some horror elements. And yeah, I'm super excited about how it's going to turn out.
Are all your players automatically going to be Force users just because of the nature of the story you're telling, or?
Good question. I left it up to them. The Star Wars 5e system has a bunch of classes. I think there's like 12 of them, but not all of them are Force sensitive or Force users. They did something interesting when they created the Star Wars 5e system. In D&D, you've got your martial characters, which is like, bows and swords and whatnot. You've got your spellcasters, and then you have some that sit in the middle where they do both things. But Star Wars 5e took spellcasting and they split it into two parts, into force casting and what they call tech casting, so that you can have people who are using like data pads and slicing and that kind of stuff, who are good at the tech side of things, because inherently Star Wars has a lot of that as part of it. So I have a player who is playing an engineer who uses tech casting, and it's kind of fun. Like he's kind of flavored it like bounty hunter style gadgets he's got on his body, or like being able to use his data pad to slice into different systems and make stuff happen around him. I have a player who's playing a droid whose backstory was she was fighting in like these pits in Coruscant, like droid fighting pits, illegal droid fighting leagues and stuff. So she is playing someone who can't use the Force as a droid. And then my other three friends are all playing people who are Force sensitive to some degree. One of them's playing someone who's like semi-Force sensitive and who can use like lower level powers. And then the other two will have access to kind of most of the powers. So, but yeah, I wanted to leave it up to them, because if they're kind of doing a bounty hunt style mission to start off, I'm having them doing some exploration through deeper levels of Coruscant to find what kind of information is being stolen. So I'm having some information get stolen from a few labs and stuff about some of this, not yet Sith alchemy, but like forbidden alchemy that the Jedi temples would have forbidden at this point. And that's what Carnus Mur is he's orchestrating this theft of all of this information so that he can ultimately create the Rakghoul Plague. But yeah, I wanted to leave it up to them. And I feel like you can still have people who are with you that are helping you fight that aren't necessarily Force sensitive. A lot of bounty hunters might not have Force sensitivity, but are spectacular in other reason, for other reasons, fast reflexes or smart or, resourceful, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I always felt that Jedi kind of threw a wrench in balancing, or Sith, like Force users in general, because they just come naturally with a lot of potential and a lot of power. Lightsabers can be potentially game-breaking weapons. You can't block anyone with doors or anything because they just cut their way through it.
Yeah, they made that joke last night. We actually played the first session last night, and they're like, "Oh, you can't stop us with locked doors because we could just slice everything open," and they did. And it's kind of part of the fun. Like the game, the Star Wars 5e game is written, trying to preserve the flavor of Star Wars instead of the flavor of D&D. And so locked doors are not a big problem in the Star Wars universe. Like that's not a common trope. There's not a lot of that kind of thing. But lightsabers are not going to be good at disarming traps and stuff later on if they ever encounter some traps or, that kind of thing. So yeah, they'll still have some fun. But the game also tried not to make lightsabers incredibly overpowered where, they'll just one-shot anybody who they hit, right? Because if you slice somebody in half, there's not much you can do to come back from that unless you're going to grow, be combined with some spider legs and live on a junk.
Yeah, I was going to say, surprisingly not impossible, though. It's highly unlikely.
There's a lot of characters in Star Wars that don't seem to die. So
right, that's true. But yeah, I'm having a ton of fun with it so far, and my players are super jazzed about it. I went on Google and I found a website that lets you create your own crawl. So like I made a crawl for our game, and I played it on the TV before we started and played the intro music. And then I found some YouTube videos to play some like Star Wars-y type music underneath while we're playing. And it's been a ton of fun so far.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a sweet medium to engage in the Star Wars universe because I feel like a lot of Star Wars fans, we want to get into the universe. That's what we actually really, as much as we like the story, we like the universe itself. Like we want to go and explore every nook and cranny. And I feel like doing a tabletop RPG is like a great way to do that.
I think so too. Yeah.
I have a question. Just in regards to what we were saying about lightsabers and the damage they can do, are you, and it may not even matter considering the era you're in. Actually, I might answer my own question by even saying this, but you're obviously playing in the Legends universe. Then, hey, if you're doing the second schism, I don't know if that's been canonized into the Disney.
I don't think so. But
I don't think so. No. I have had to kind of break a few things. No one's asked me to use a blaster pistol yet, but technically, as far as I understand, in Legends lore, blasters are like still limited tech at that point. And then also, from what I understand, lightsabers are still like backpack battery powered at that point. So I haven't made them like.
Are you sure? I thought that was even further back, but I might have to go double check that.
In the pictures I've seen, like the comic book illustrations of Ajunta Pal and Jojan on the Sith planet, they have like cables attached to their sabers. Okay. Again, like that's just artist interpretation. So who knows?
I could be wrong. Yeah, Christian seems to think I'm wrong.
Yeah, Derek's right.
Okay, yeah.
So,
I just got my timelines mixed up here.
Yeah. But. They haven't tried to get in a spaceship and jump yet either, but obviously the hyperspace lanes are a lot less defined at this point, being pre-hyperspace wars or pre like that kind of big expansion that the Republic was trying to do, right? So if all goes well, I think the next thing I will do is the hyperspace wars. Which will be a ton of fun, Nagasetao and stuff. So like, kind of like, okay, you banished them, and now a few hundred years later, and now they're back, and bigger and badder and better than ever. And here's the new threat you get to deal with as new characters. So it could be fun.
Now, as a DM, would you allow someone to get into a ship and go into hyperspace to destroy another ship? Or is that not allowed?
My buddy again, Parker, the one who is just like a hound for the lore here. He would probably just like get up and walk out if I did something like that, and I would not blame him in the slightest. That was the stupidest thing to me. I watched it and I was like, what are we doing? Like, if an X-wing can fly through hyperspace, what is stopping anyone from creating an army of droid ships that are hyperspace capable and just launching them through every single planet of their enemies and just being done with the whole thing? Like, I don't know. Anyway.
So in this RPG, what kind of, are you using miniatures? Yeah.
We have not broken out the miniatures yet.
Okay.
This first session, we had a small combat in a black market in the lower levels of Coruscant, but we just did what's called Theater of the Mind, where we all like kind of describe what's happening. But I will certainly be breaking out the miniatures for the more complex battles in the future. I might be sending them to, what is it called? The temple Anil Kesh, where there's a bunch more kind of forbidden knowledge that the Jedi would have put there on Tython.
Yeah.
So I anticipate it being a bit more complex there, like more powerful enemies that they might face. And then also on the battle of Korbos, I'm probably going to do some Leviathans, like the Sith Leviathans that what is her name? Something Sin. Anyway, she create those
Swords of
Sin, yeah. So I'm gonna have some big nasty monsters on Korbos that she's created as kind of like that last stand of the Dark Jedi. So yeah, we'll definitely break out some miniatures then. Also, part of the problem was one of my friends hadn't designed his character yet, but I have a buddy with a 3D printer, and so once everyone's got their character design set, we'll 3D print those miniatures and we'll have it ready to go.
Ooh, that's awesome. Do you have any Star Wars miniatures yourself, or is that a future plan?
I don't, but my buddy who's got the 3D printer just 3D printed me some bookends, and I got the Han Solo
cool.
Frozen in Carbonite. So
That is cool.
I was stoked about that. So
I definitely want that.
that's the one I've got. I'll find the file if I can, and I'll send it to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's sweet.
Yeah, I had to get that when I saw it. I was like, oh, I gotta have the Han Frozen in Carbonite. That's too good.
Yeah, fair. Do you do any wargaming, or do you mostly do just RPGs?
I know a little bit about the Warhammer universe, but I have never played Warhammer before. Like, I've never actually played a game. So no, I haven't ever played a war game specifically. I know there's a Star Wars war game as well, right? What is it called?
There's a couple. Like... There's Legion, and then there's Shatterpoint, I think is what it's called. Star Wars. Yeah. There's a couple of those ones, which Christian and I keep talking about getting into. But
I mean, I'm already into it.
Well,
more questions.
Nice. Yeah, wargaming has always seemed fun to me. It's just one of those things I've never had the time for. I feel like you got to have friends that get you into it. It's kind of hard to like, well, I'm gonna go get into Warhammer now. Like, I don't know. I guess some people do it, but like, yeah, I just haven't had the time.
And it'll break your wallet too.
Right.
Right. Can confirm.
And Lord knows I already have enough hobbies. So.
Do you do any card games like Magic or anything like that, or any Star Wars trading games? No.
What's that new Star Wars game? I've played that once.
Oh, man.
I don't remember what it's called. I got some buddies at work who play card games. My brother is big into Magic. He's got like 10 decks or whatever. And I'll play with him. I have a few friends that are into it. There's a lot of crossover between D&D and Magic because they're made by the same company.
Yeah.
But no, I have never gotten into Magic for the same reason, because I have seen the effect of other people's wallets and have decided against
the side effects.
Diving into that. Yeah. A lot of these books I got for free from the company that makes D&D. So
okay,
I do have quite a collection, but luckily it's because of press credentials or review copies or whatever. So
Wizards did produce a Star Wars RPG too themselves.
Yes, they did.
Oh, you got it right there.
Yeah, it's called. Well, this is just one of them. This one's called the Saga Edition.
Okay.
So this came out in 2008, I believe.
Yeah, they had the IP from 2000 to 2010. So.
And they did a few. There was one or two published before this one. I think this was the last one they did, the Saga Edition. And actually, a lot of the rules and the kind of design work they put into this ended up being what they used for the 5th edition of the D&D game they published too. So that's interesting. I've been meaning to try to get some of the guys who wrote this on one of my shows to chat with them about it. I know one of them at least, but yeah, we'll see.
Cool. That's sweet.
I mean, no, like, we follow each other on the internet and we've tweeted at each other once or
You don't
twice.
hang out every weekend.
Right.
Yeah, that's cool. Any of you guys have any other questions? So Christian jumped off.
I guess while we're waiting on Christian to come back, this might be a strange question, but say, and if you don't know the answer to this, that's perfectly fine. If you have like a homebrew setting, like something that's completely your own, what is the best way to go about deciding what system or rules would best fit that setting?
It's a great question. So homebrew settings, D&D has like a bunch of settings that you can play in. The most popular one is called the Forgotten Realms, and those are based on some fantasy novels and some other stuff that kind of have a pre-established lore. There are, there's like a whole map, there's a bunch of factions, there's deities, there's a whole world kind of already built for you. But you can, like Gerald's saying, like tons of people will design their own world from scratch and then play games or run games in their own world, right? And a bunch of video games and books and stuff have come from people's homebrew worlds that end up becoming other media too, which is cool. But yeah, if you've created a world just because you're like writing or you just like world building for fun, I would probably just try to think about the flavor of the types of stories that you'd like to tell, and then from there try to whittle it down to the systems that kind of match that. It's hard to answer this. Well, it's hard to like you'd have to go out and like read so many different RPG systems before you could kind of decide. So that can be difficult, but a lot of people, what they will do is they will take the skeleton of D&D and strip it down and then reflavor it based on what they want. And so that's kind of an easier way to do it, lean on someone's pre-existing rules and then just change stuff or delete stuff or add stuff as necessary. But yeah, I guess, there's tons of YouTube videos out there. There's tons of blogs and stuff. And so you can do some research. You could try to go into some forums. I don't like to spend a lot of time in forums, depending on the forum, but you can always go ask a question like, hey, I'm trying to tell a story about XYZ. Does anybody have any suggestions for like an RPG system that would fit that? Lots of people are going to have their own opinions. So, grain of salt as always, but yeah, I guess I would just kind of try to figure out what are the few most important things to you, the stories that you want to tell in your world, and then try to whittle it down from there.
All right. And kind of follow-up question to that. What are your thoughts on just making up your own system?
Yeah, I think it's totally fine. It can be daunting just because a lot of RPGs are well thought out and have teams of people working on them full time to create them and to test them and make them worthwhile. But at the same time, I know people who have done this and who have just designed a system while they are playing, right? Like, and it works just fine. I had a guy on my show, How Not to Dungeon Master, a while ago named Cam Banks, and he's famous for having written hold on, I better Google this system just so I do him some justice. But I asked him kind of a question like this in an interview. I said, like, if you're designing a new game, where do you start? And he said, I always start with the character sheet. So like what kind of stats your character is going to have, if they're going to have stats, what kind of abilities do I want to give them? What kind of, stuff are they going to face, and how will they be able to solve the problems? And if you can kind of like figure out what your characters are able to do, then I feel like the system kind of follows. And so I'm going to lean on his answer because I feel like that's probably the best answer that I've come across. The system he built is called the Cortex system. And the idea, you can buy one of the books, and the idea is he's like created like dozens and dozens and dozens of different versions and different stuff you can bolt on. So you can read through the book and say, ooh, I do want that. Like I want a mechanic that helps my players judge like how frightened they are, or I want this, or I want that. And he's kind of like built tons of different stuff. And so you can bolt on what you want and create a system from that, and then leave the rest. And then that might help you kind of build the game that you're looking for. So yeah, check that out. Cortex system. Cam Banks is his name. Cool guy.
Very interesting.
Cool. Well, I think we're pushing up against the time here. That was awesome. Thanks for breaking down RPGing and your Star Wars RPG. That sounds pretty sweet. Give us one last plug. Where can people find you and your show?
So the show again is called the Dungeon Master's Block. You can find it anywhere podcasts exist. It's also on YouTube, not video, but you can find the audio there. You can follow us on any social media. It's usually DMS_block for our username. You can hit me up as well. My personal accounts for like tabletop stuff will be under on Twitter, HN2DM, so 5 characters, HN, the number 2DM, or on Instagram, I'm How Not to DM, spelled out, or maybe it's How Not to Dungeon Master. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if you have any questions about running games, I'm in the Star Lords Discord, so you can hit me up there. You have questions about getting started, or you just want to chat about tabletop gaming with me because you're already into it, then I'm always down for that kind of stuff. So yeah, you can find me in all those different places.
Sweet. Well, thanks, Derek, for hopping on, and for everyone else, thank you for joining us. If you want to reach out to the Star Lords podcast, don't forget to check us out on all our social medias. We're on Instagram, Facebook, X, Discord. Anything else I missed? No, I think that's it. And also another shout out to Gerald for guest hosting with us today. Go check out his podcast, the Grim Lore podcast, wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, boys. Thanks for joining. Let's get out of this hangar bay.